Thank you, Robin. All right, so thank you very much for those of you who are joining us this evening for our talk with sTo, and thank you, sTo, for being here. This is our 6th and final talk of the year. We will launch a new series of talks in our spring term, so please visit our website at manhattangraphiccenter.org to learn more. And while you're there, you'll be able to sign up for our mailing list and see our other events and course offerings. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to keep up to date. Manhattan Graphic Center would like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council on the Arts, the Sherman Foundation, the Pierre and Tanya Matisse Foundation, our members, and other donors and friends, all who make our artist talks and other programming possible. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, which is at the bottom of your screen, and we'll read those when the presentation has ended. And unless sTo prefers we interrupt you, but I think it works good to have it at the end if it's okay.
Yeah.
My name is Kay Sarantonio, and I'm very happy to welcome sTo to our artist series. sTo is an interdisciplinary artist whose work has centered on collaborations with abused landscapes that have included printmaking polluted waterways, 3D scanning the Fresh Kills landfill, recycling waste into art materials, and performing at Superfund sites. sTo is based in Queens, New York, with familial roots in Vietnam and Virginia, and his work incorporates these bonds by connecting issues of their history, environment, traditions, and politics. And now I'll hand things over to sTo for the screen share. Thank you.
Sweet. Thanks, Kay. Thanks for having me. All right. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Cool. So, it's been interesting. I've been doing some talks recently and kind of realized that a lot of my talk is this sort of story. It's a personal story, but it's one that's totally interwoven with my practice. And so I'm going to take you on a little journey. This is a photograph of Manhattan, of course, from the Williamsburg waterfront in the year 1999. And this was the moment I decided to move to New York, actually. I grew up in Virginia and had to come to New York a bunch as a kid. But I was always in Manhattan. And this was the first time I went to Brooklyn. And it's the first time that I went to the waterfront. And, I think there was something about being down by the water, for one, but also being in this kind of beautifully derelict, and yet it felt very free, and it felt like this autonomous zone. All of a sudden, outside of the chaos of the city, you had this like moment of peace. And even though there were cars turned over and it was kind of crazy, there was this entry point for me, I think, into the city by visiting the edge. It was something about, I think, being down there that I thought, okay, like there's space for me in this city, and there are places still that are not completely taken over, So yeah, I took that photograph and I moved to New York a few weeks later, actually, and began, exploring the waterfronts. For me, they kind of maintained this place in history, kind of this forgotten industrial history that I found super interesting. And they were also abandoned, and they were just great places to kind of explore and hang out. I think that over the years, they've become more and more important to me as well. I think I've been getting deeper into the histories of these spaces of the city. And, I really kind of realized how in New York, people sort of have their backs to the water a lot of the times. We're surrounded by water, and yet often it's just something that you go through or you go over to get to where you're going. So, I spent many, many years just exploring these edge spaces and finding cool secret spots to hang out. And, this is what the Williamsburg waterfront looks like today. It unfortunately, kind of became this condo nightmare there. But the good part about that was that for a few years, I was hanging out on the Williamsburg waterfront there, but it got us, me and my friends, it got us moving downriver. So, in this aerial shot, the East River is that body of water on the left. There's that little sliver of Manhattan on the left, and you've got Brooklyn, North Brooklyn on the right, and Long Island City and Queens on the top. And so we went, just sort of downriver, following the East River, and then eventually we made ourselves down the Newtown Creek, which is that little tributary that you see separating Queens from Brooklyn. And this is over the course of many years of exploring these spaces, and kind of as the gentrification was following us downriver, we wound up at the butt end of the Newtown Creek, which I kind of figured was least likely to be gentrifiable or discovered. And this is still, a zone that I like to hang out in a lot. I think the Newtown Creek is extremely fascinating for its industrial history, for the wildlife that's still there. I mean, there's still plenty of fish and blue crab that you see, and stray cats and Canadian geese. There's all this life, amidst an area that has been heavily polluted and environmentally abused for over a century. So these are the kind of places that I like to hang out in, and kind of give a little TLC to. But it would take years before they kind of played a role in my art practice. So the first few years of my time in New York City were very water driven. I spent lots of time down by the water, and was initially drawn to move to New York because of the waterfronts. In 2003, I experienced a fire with my partner at the time, and what was crazy about this fire was we at the time we were talking about starting an artist space, and this was the night that we kind of came up with the concept and the name, and we're like, we're gonna do this art gallery in Williamsburg, and we went out to the bodega to get some beer. We came back and the house was burning down. So the house completely burned down, and basically, we like lost everything and had to start over. But in the process of that totally tragic, event, it definitely propelled us into this sort of like do it now, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow kind of attitude. And so we started this gallery space called Cinders that was in homage to that event and the fire, and kind of the urgency that we felt after that. And we moved into the back, I lived in a storefront. And what was great about this space was it was an artist-run gallery, but it was really a community space. And it was about the community of friends. It was about inviting people into a really welcoming space that hosted music performances and installations and gave a lot of artists their first shows. It also had a really heavy, amount of printed matter, books, zines, posters, and prints, all, kind of available and accessible for just about anybody to take home. So, that space lasted from 2004 until 2012. And, unfortunately, we were victims to the insane rent tripling of our gallery space. And, I'm not going to get into it here, but I do really hate that narrative that the gallery sped the gentrification. In this case, I lived it, and it really wasn't the case. But anyways, that is the narrative people like to spin, and it was still very disillusioning to create such a community space and kind of lose it, and all the other community spaces in the neighborhood at the time were eventually shuttered because of the condos coming in and the rents getting tripled. The saving grace for me was that we had this show in Tokyo, so I was pretty disillusioned about the whole thing. But I took off to Japan to do this. It was a Cinders Gallery Presents kind of group show at a gallery called Waiting Room. And while I was there, I just really fell in love with the Japanese calligraphy that I was seeing. I was seeing a lot of handwritten signs all over the city. And I got some sumi ink and began to learn the basics and kind of learn the way of painting with sumi ink. Sumi ink is an extremely elegant, black ink, and it's kind of incredible. You dip your brush in the ink, and you can paint for miles with the stuff. It's really beautiful. I kind of came back to New York City, and the gallery wasn't really happening anymore. And looking back on it now, I was just processing everything that was happening in my work, and kind of like working it out with sumi ink and these sort of abstract paintings that became big and installation based and action based. And I certainly felt that same kind of urgency I felt when we started the gallery, but I just kind of poured it into my own work, and I wasn't really sure where it was going, but I was happy to just sort of follow the line and see where it was going to take me. And I was doing works like this, abstract, definitely based on the using the ink itself and how it sort of flows out of the brush, and certainly inspired by Japanese calligraphy and all sorts of calligraphy. At a certain point, I spilled sumi ink on water, and hilariously, this is how I discovered suminagashi, which is a floating ink printmaking technique. You basically make a floating painting with ink, with sumi ink specifically, which is the only ink that floats on water, and you lay a piece of paper down on top of the surface to make a monoprint. And when I discovered this, for one, I didn't know this was a thing. Actually, I was like, oh my god, I'm a genius. Did I invent this? But no, I didn't invent this at all. It's called suminagashi, and it actually dates back to the 12th century when Shinto monks were doing this in the countryside of Japan. But I loved actually learning about the Shinto religion because it's an indigenous religion to Japan. They're animistic in their view of the world, and actually doing suminagashi for them is an act of divination. It's actually kind of like connecting your human spirit to the water spirit, because they believe that a rock, a human, a tree, an animal, the waterway is all equal. And I'm not a religious person, but I do feel that way as well, and I kind of connected with that belief, and it kind of got me into this idea of connecting with the water. Sometimes I teach classes, and you can see this girl's face. This is like kind of my reaction to it when I did it for the first time. It's super easy to do, and if you haven't done it and are interested, you should definitely give it a shot. For me, I think I got really into the idea of collaborating with water, and this is a few years later. I started making paints with oil paint mixtures of oil paints and other kinds of like oils, like olive oil and linseed oil, and bringing inflatable swimming pools into my studio and just really having fun with the medium, and not really worrying about the sort of like rules that often accompany things like paper marbling. I was really interested in this very action-based collaboration with the water. And I was making books, and I was making bigger books, and I was making bigger prints. And this is over the course of a few years, and I had kind of reached a point where I kind of didn't know what I was doing or where I was going with this. But I saw this photograph, and this is actually a BP oil spill. You can see the boat on top of the water. And I really, really struck me that, for one, this is this completely tragic event that's absolutely beautiful. It's undeniably aesthetically attractive, and yet it's like this horrific situation. And it looked exactly like what I was trying to recreate in my studio. And because I'd been hanging out down by the water for so many years, and specifically Newtown Creek in New York, I knew that the Newtown Creek looked like this. There was a Greenpoint oil spill, and after heavy rainfall, the sewage does um, outfall into the creek and the East River. So it sort of dawned on me that I had been wanting to collaborate with water this whole time. Why was I not collaborating with the waterways around me? Instead of just filling up a swimming pool with water, what if I went to the source? What if I went to the water bodies that were surrounding us? So I got some paper. I got a boat off of Craigslist for $100, and I began rowing around New York City and spending most of my time on the Newtown Creek. It is your right as a citizen in New York that you can row around the water bodies with a human powered boat that's under 14 feet. You don't need a license. And I really enjoy exercising my rights. This was just revolutionary for me because all of a sudden, I was out in the elements, I was rowing around, and I was printmaking. Like, these are also my favorite things to do. And it just sort of collided in this kind of, it was a very natural way, but in a perfect way for me as an artist. And I kind of call this tsunami nagashi. And for me, even more than printmaking, this was about reimagining what an art studio could be and how I could work. All of a sudden, I didn't need to be indoors. I didn't need to be in a white cube. I could literally be out in the elements making work. And the cool thing about this process for me is that, you're out there on a boat, maybe you pull a print, it's really hard because it's like you have a giant soaking wet piece of paper that's probably fairly toxic. You're trying not to get it on you. And then you got to go let it dry somewhere, so I often like lay them in the grass or on the shore and hang out, and it's all that other extra time of hanging out that's really enjoyable. And it's a way that I've really began connecting with New York City in a whole nother way, and I began showing the work. And what was nice was that I realized that in a lot of ways, this was giving visibility to these sites as well that people were not necessarily aware of. They were kind of like map making, it was like site specific, but of that moment in the water, in that particular place, and the residue and patterns and things on the page, we're from that moment, but also it could be from so many, moments in history. I mean, the water contains, memory. I mean, it's got all the chemicals that we've ever dumped in that water, and some of it could be bubbling up to the surface. It's also a really cool way to see the city and get this very different perspective from the water. And I love going down these really little waterways and just noticing the life and the fish and what's happening. And some people are fishing, and most people are not paying attention to these spaces, but there's still a lot going on there. There's, yeah, great bird watching. And, I was enjoying this process so much that I took it upon myself to build a little shack down by the water. And I called it the Newtown Creek Center for Visual Research. I made this sort of official looking sign that I put on it. And this is totally a legal shack. I had been spending a lot of time down there, so I had a good sense of where to put it and the fact that I'd probably be able to get away with it. And at that time, I lost one of my studios as the building got evicted. So this became my, new studio, waterfront studio, and very small. But because I work outside most of the time, I was using it as a place to store, my work, have gatherings as well, and really kind of bring people together. We had a lot of music concerts and just sort of these gatherings where people could see this space and really enjoy it, and even though it's a super fun site, the sun still sets, there's still these really beautiful moments to be had. And it feels really good to give a place that perhaps needs more love than others, that kind of visibility. And I'm still doing that work. Unfortunately, the shack was torn down, but I got a good run. It was like a couple of years, actually. I was working there. But I still do events. This is one I did last year with an artist named Cody Herman. Cody does a lot of tours, and so it was pretty cool. You met up with Cody. She gave you a tour of Willets Point, and then you wound up in this incredible tidal wetland right on the Flushing Creek. And there I had set up a performance stage. There was free food and free kayaking, and we made drinks out of mugwort and goldenrod. And it was just a really great convening of people in a very underseen space in the middle of the city. And I think that part of my work is about that. It's about bringing people together in these different kinds of ways. So, I'm half Vietnamese. I was born in America, and for me, I always had this longing to go to Vietnam, but it wasn't until 2015 that I actually went. And one of the things that struck me, I was already thinking a lot about water at this point, and the word for water in Vietnamese, "nuc," is the same word for country. It actually, just depending on how you use it, people can kind of tell what you mean, but it's the same exact word. And I love that, and I love the fact that water is a really big part of life in Vietnam. But so I was really excited to go. I was researching a ton, and of course, when I got there, I had to get in some boats. I got this little boat that was extremely hard to paddle around in. But I made a friend who took me around, and I couldn't wait to get on water there. And unfortunately, this is the kind of thing I found myself, rowing by. I mean, just really decimated environmental abuse. These areas were just heartbreaking to see, so much trash, so much single use plastic trash. It was like overwhelming, it was like so much. I think at the time I just didn't even know how to process what I was seeing, and the fact that people were living there and living in it and just sort of dealing with it. But it was completely heartbreaking. I mean, I had waited my whole life to go to Vietnam, and of course the first thing I wanted to do was boat around, and this is what I discovered. So I don't know, for me, I think I just processed stuff through art. And so I began printmaking in these waterways while I was there. And, inspired by the resiliency of the communities living on the water, creating homes with next to nothing, and sort of dealing with it, but also really wanting to incite some kind of change in these conditions. I made a video about this trip, and worked my way up to making a show. I ended up doing an exhibition there in 2016. The following year, I came back, did a show in a gallery there with the prints. I did a performance, and I called the show "Water is Life," or "Country is Life." And it felt so good to be able to do something in my motherland that I was kind of getting to know actually for the first time. What was crazy was that a day after the opening of the exhibition, there was a 60-ton fish kill in the same body of water that I had been making those prints. And I just happened to walk by this. It wasn't on the news really. I just happened to walk by it and see this, horrific sight of all these fish washed up, belly up. And somebody dumped something, but nobody was really saying anything, and nobody seemed to know what had happened. It got cleaned up in a day or two and then kind of forgotten about, which was insane to me. I kept asking everybody, what happened in the West River? What does anybody know? And they're kind of like shrugging their shoulders, like, this is just sort of what happens. Well, word got out that an artist had done an art show about that body of water. So the news actually came to interview me, and what was great was that, okay, it wasn't being shown on the news, but through art, I was able to talk about it. I was able to talk about what I saw, talk about the dead fish I saw, talk about, how it didn't seem like anyone knew what was going on. I of course used the privilege of being an American to sort of say all this stuff on the news, and it was great. And I kind of like learned in that moment how through art you can kind of like subvert systems of control, and kind of get things past, perhaps censors and filters that might otherwise not want to talk about real issues. So that was really an inspiring, situation. But I couldn't get this stuff out of my mind. It was just like, what is all of this stuff? And of course, this is not like it was when my family lived in Vietnam, and it's not like it was even 20 years ago. I mean, the proliferation of this material was just so disheartening to see. So I came back to America kind of obsessed with this stuff, and like started to research about styrofoam, and which is so ubiquitous in the trash piles in our shorelines. Of course, Dow Chemical Company, there's always some evil empire company behind these products. Dow Chemical Company, basically invented styrofoam. And you start looking at what else they've done. Well, they kind of made bleach, they made saran wrap, they also made mustard gas for World War I and II. They made Agent Orange, which was of course used in the Vietnam War to defoliate the forest, and which of course proved to be horrible for humans and seeped into the soil to the point where people are still being born with birth defects, right? I mean, it's just insane. And even in the 90s, Dow Chemical Company created breast implants that ruptured inside of hundreds of thousands of women who, there was a big lawsuit against them or whatever. But of course, Dow Chemical Company, was able to just pay that off and continue going. But all that to say, this legacy, I began becoming sort of obsessed with the legacy of you know making these products, right, and how it's part of a whole lineage of sort of a horrible wrongdoing. I think to balance all that really downer research, I began just doing some fish impressions, which is another Japanese technique called gyotaku. Gyotaku it's a fish rubbing essentially. You actually paint a fish body and with sumi ink, and you rub out the print. And what I liked about this was it's really beautiful. It's really delicate. It's a real way to kind of honor the fish before you eat him. And you really got to get in there and rub gently and kind of really feel the scales and the contour of the shape of its body, its parts, and its mouth and everything. I of course I'm not really a fisher, so I had been fishing out all of the styrofoam, and I began to think about creating work and impressions with this garbage. So I began doing gyotaku with the trash that I had been pulling out, and I've been calling this gomitaku, which basically translates to trash impression, even though I kind of made up that word. And for me, this was like this ultimate acknowledgement. At least it was for me to kind of pull the stuff out of the waterways and actually rub it, ink it and rub it and create these prints. So these became scrolls. These became these giant prints on fabrics and canvases and paper. And I kind of realized that there was some sort of like, it was like this kind of primitive mark making, but just very raw, like a petroglyph. These are almost like my petrochemical petroglyphs, or impressions. And I think like for me ordering, they're so chaotic when they're out in the world, and I'll pick them and put them in bags and bring them back to the studio and kind of orderly organize them and then print with them, almost like printing blocks. And this is a way again for me, I think, just to make sense of all that stuff that I had been seeing in Vietnam and here in America as well. So it's been fun. This project has kind of grown, and I've been able to collaborate with local cleanup groups in different cities where we do big coastal cleanups. And I give them special art bags, and I tell them, as you're picking up garbage, if you find anything that you think has some sort of art potential, put it in an art bag and save it for me. So this was a show I did based on that process, and everything I made the prints with, was handpicked by other people for me, and it was fun to kind of go through these objects and learn about the site. You learn so much about what's in the garbage, and make something with it, and kind of be able to encourage a coastal cleanup while making art and kind of bringing everybody together for the work. There was even a message in a bottle in the garbage, and all of these ceramic spark plugs, which I mean, there seemed to be like hundreds of these things. And doing some research, I found out there was like this plant that had been there. It was gone now, the building was gone, but they made these ceramic spark plugs that were really popular in the 1920s. Still there. It's still in the shoreline. And then I got to do a residency at a wastewater treatment facility. This is actually in my hometown of Alexandria, Virginia. And, it was a kind of application-based residency, 19 months. And what they wanted me to do was to embed myself in the wastewater treatment facility, which meant going underground. It meant getting to know the people working. It meant, seeing things that you wouldn't normally get to see. This is a photograph I took of the bottom of a settling tank. And the settling tank is where all the wastewater goes and sort of settles, right? And eventually they kind of sift all the solids out of the water and they send it to another section of the wastewater treatment facility. Well, they had emptied this tank out, and I said, "Oh my God, it's so gorgeous. Can I go down there and photograph it?" And they looked at me like I was crazy. But then when they saw the photos later, they kind of understood what I was talking about. And that was really that I think made the residency for me, the fact that I was able to share all this behind scenes stuff with the public, but also kind of show the employees at the residency, at the facility, how I saw their job and their environment that they were working in, and what was happening. So um, that was an incredible residency. It was during COVID. Well, COVID kind of happened in the middle of it. So that definitely disrupted a lot of my plans. But what was really cool is that they were able to track COVID in the wastewater, and I was learning about that. There's a whole science and chemistry lab at the wastewater residency, at the facility, that I was able to shadow and kind of see the inner workings of that aspect and look at water under the microscope. So fun. Talk about giving visibility to the invisible. These are some wastewater prints I made out of the wastewater residency, and it was fun. The city actually bought these, and I kind of credited it was a collaboration with all the citizens of Alexandria. And so, now present day, I am the artist in residence of the Department of Sanitation. I think when the application for this residency came up, I really jumped at the chance to do it because of the great experience I had at the wastewater residency. And this kind of, I think for me, I've been interested in collaborating more and more. I think first it was with water bodies and the environment, and then with cleanup crews and activists on the water, and now it's with labor forces. So there's 10,000 employees at sanitation. There's over 200 buildings, and so much to learn, but so much to do. And what's cool about, I call it the Department of Sanity, because it's a really crazy job. It's kind of like calling a big person tiny, but it's a really, really gargantuan task of eliminating or moving the waste of New York City. So this residency, in case you're wondering, it's called the Public Artist in Residence. It was inspired by the artist Meryl Latterman Euclides, who is an incredible artist. She was the first sanitation artist in residence, and really the only one until me. I'm very honored to be the next one after Merrill. But inspired by Merrill's 40 years at sanitation, the pair residency was created, and so they put artists in different city agencies. And I just happened to be the first artist in sanitation, in this program. So if you don't know Meryl's work, she's an incredible artist who basically embedded herself in the sanitation department in the late 70s. Of course, I had to meet Meryl. She is super amazing and inspiring and still doing work and still really, really kicking ass. And I was a little intimidated, to be honest. Like, she's done 40 years of art about sanitation. What was I going to do? But she kind of gave me the thumbs up. She gave me the encouragement just to get out there, show up, and see what happens. So, first place I would go is the headquarters of sanitation, which is downtown at 125 Worth Street. And, I was paired with the records management department of sanitation, which was really cool for me because their office is really fun. There's boxes of old magazines and printed materials over the last century, photographs, audio cassettes. And then, beyond that research, I began riding on collection trucks, waking up at 5 a.m. to jump on the truck and ride and see what that labor looks like, which is very intense and very, you know, it's sobering to think about just the physicality of dealing with New York City's waste every single day. I even rode with my personal sanitation workers, Frank and Egan. That was really incredible. These are the guys who pick up my trash and do my whole neighborhood. And I got to ride with them. And, now when I put my garbage out, I mean, I like to think I was pretty conscious before, but now I'm extra. I mean, I'm just thinking about these guys. I know them, they're super sweet, and I'm making sure my trash is light. It's not, I'm doing my neighbor's garbage even to make sure it's safe. And, but I think just putting a face behind the labor is so important. And this inspired me to try to help do that in some way. The spaces that waste is managed are insane. This is a waste transfer station this is in Staten Island, actually, but this is where the collection truck dumps their usually 10 to 12 tons a day. Each truck does for a total of 12,000 tons a day, which is an insane amount of garbage. The recycling center, very fun, very sobering as well, because that mountain of garbage doesn't end. I mean, it's just constantly this gigantic mountain. And then here we are at the Central Repair Shop. This is in Woodside, Queens, and this is where I'm currently stationed at. This is where my studio is. When I found out about this place, I got really excited because it's a gigantic building where things get repaired. So you have mechanics repairing trucks, there's carpenters, there's welders, and there's a machine shop. And there's also a paint and sign shop. And so I was really interested to go check that out. And when I got there, there was a screen printing shop that hadn't been used in over 20 years. I couldn't believe it. The old screens were still there. The equipment was still there, and it was in this room this is like a before and after photo. Right on the left is what it used to look like, just dark and kind of dirty. I cleaned it up. I got lights put in the light sockets, and it's this incredible archive of silk screens, the equipment, old photos. So Sanitation's let me take this over and kind of resurrect it into a working print shop, and that's what I've been doing. I've been basically collaborating with this archive. These were all made for signs, like metal signs. So I kind of transferred, or I like redid the screens so they could be done with water-based ink. And so I began screen printing and marbling and kind of redoing this whole history of visual language that sanitation used over this is over 50 years of different kinds of ad campaigns and messaging. And I just found this so fascinating to learn by printing and like learn by kind of collaborating and putting my own spin on things. In the same building, someone mentioned to me offhand that there was a TV studio, and I had to go see that. And so when I went in there, it's the same story, kind of defunct. No one had used it in a long time, obviously. Tons of equipment and also tons of films and videos. I mean, we're talking like 600 different tapes, floppy disks, reel to reels. It's like the history of the video format was in there. And I couldn't wait to try to see what this stuff was. I got these two guys, Henry and Mike, out of retirement. They used to run the audiovisual unit. No one's really been running it with this equipment in quite some time. Got them back. They helped me hook everything back up, clean the machines. That's Mike, and it's been incredible to watch this footage and archive it. I told the sanitation department that I would digitize these tapes, and I'll play a little bit of it for you right now. Let's see. The original sanitation workers wore all white in the late 1800s.
Take it away, take it away. That's a motto that we gotta all obey. Yes, the boys of sanitation win the hearts and admiration of the folks in each location every day. East side, west side, all around the town.
This is trash pickup in 1936.
Swinging along with great elation, singing a song of sanitation.
He's not doing a good job.
Take it away, take it away.
So to be fair, that video was what not to do in the context of the film. So yeah, I mean that's like not even the tip of the iceberg. We're talking like it's just the gold mine. I put in a tape and I'm digitizing it in real time, and it's just incredible footage. I mean, I at this point I'm re-editing shorts and I'm putting them on the sanitation flat screen TVs. There's hundreds of these TVs in all the buildings, and so it's really cool because they have like kind of daily news stuff, but I've been able to put my videos on the televisions and kind of really interact with the 10,000 employees through the video screen and through this video archive. So that's been a big part of what I've been doing, and I'm currently I guess it's like screenshots of the first video I made. But I'm currently taking all that footage, editing it, and working on basically sort of like an art film that's historical and abstract and strange, but is definitely going to sort of show you the history of sanitation through the archive, which is really kind of fun. And so this project's called the Office of Invisibility. You can check out the website if you want to see more stuff. Within the department, they have the Office of Public Affairs, and I just figured to kind of make an umbrella office for myself called the Office of Invisibility. It's really just me, but all of these projects I'm doing within sanitation are about giving visibility, and so I thought that would be kind of fun to do. There I am in my office, which is also the TV set of the TV studio with my posters. But what's been great is the employees can come visit me there. They bring me stuff. We talk about archival materials. In the print shop, I teach people how to silk screen, and we make prints together sometimes too. And yeah, it's been this really cool kind of collective discourse, on our discards. And this project, the Privy Pit, is even open to you all if you're interested in collaborating in this kind of waste study. You can go to officeofinvisibility.com, and there's a set of prompts that I came up with sanitation employees. And you can do the prompt and upload a photograph of that. And it goes into this special sort of interactive archive that I'm creating called the Privy Pit. And so, yeah, I think that's basically my talk. It's sort of all the different things I've been working on over the years.
Thank you. That was really, really wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm sure folks have some questions, so we can take a few minutes. If you want to put a question in the chat for sTo, or we're a small group, if you prefer to unmute and ask a question directly, please feel free.